Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. This is our new narrative, and today is May 13th, 2020. Now, today I'm going to bring to you episode 9 in the series I'm doing within the podcast called Things I Wish I Also Learned in February. And the title for today is America's First Emancipation Proclamation. And what we're going to do is talk about that and its consequences that are still being felt today. So let's dive into it. Well, before we dive into it, I want to ask a little favor. Please like, share, and subscribe so I can keep bringing this information to you that you're not likely to hear in school, and you definitely won't hear it in the media. So here we go. Today we're going to talk about Bacon's rebellion. Okay, so in 1676, this is 100 years before America's Revolutionary War and almost 200 years before Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, right? So what happened? Well, Nathaniel Bacon came over from England. He was loyal to the crown, like a lot of people. And he was wealthy, so when he got to Virginia, he started rubbing shoulders with the elites. You know, he got all his land together and was working it. Well, he wasn't working it. He was hiring people to work it. And the incident took place. That incident was some Indians killed some colonists. Then some colonists went to kill some Indians in revenge. However, the colonists who went to kill those Indians, side note, one of those colonists was related to our first president, George Washington. They killed the wrong Indians. They ended up killing some Susquehannock Indians who had trade relations with the colony of Virginia, and they protected the colony of Virginia from other Indians. So they had a really good relationship with the colonists, right? Well, when this incident took place, the Susquehannock Indians wanted revenge. So they came and they took revenge on a few Virginia colonists. Well, here's where Bacon steps in. Nathaniel Bacon, wanted to go take revenge on the Susquehannocks and any other Indians. And so he asked the commission from the governor to allow him to basically gather up a militia and go kill off the Susquehannocks. Well, obviously, Berkeley didn't want that because the Susquehannock Indians were friendly to the colonists, and Berkeley had a financial interest in trade with the Susquehannocks. So Berkeley wouldn't allow him to get a commission. So, however, Bacon got a militia together anyway and went off and killed some Indians. Well, this didn't sit well with the governor. Bacon went and killed some Susquehannock Indians. That didn't sit well with the governor. The governor basically arrested Bacon. Then it basically was slap on the wrist, let him go, asking him not to do it again. He promised he wouldn't do it, but he did it anyway. He went and started killing Indians again with a small militia. Well, during this time, letters are being sent back to the king by Bacon and Governor Berkeley. Two different stories on the same story, right? So Bacon is saying, Bacon of Bacon's Rebellion is telling the king, look, your governor, Berkeley, doesn't have your colonists' best interests at heart. He's only concerned with himself and his trade opportunities with Indians. He's doing the king a disservice. He's not acting in the king's best interest by doing this. And therefore, I'm asking for a commission from you, basically, the king, to go off and slaughter Indians. Governor Berkeley also sent letters to the king saying, hey, we got this crazy guy named Bacon here. He's getting a militia together to go off killing Indians, and we need these Indians to protect us from other Indians. And we have a trade going with these Indians that basically we're getting a lot of taxes off of this stuff and we can send this back to you. So, hey, send some troops to help us squash Bacon. In the meantime, because this wasn't an email or even a telegram, right? This is in 1676. So on the ground back in colonial Virginia, the government and the militia clash. And to reinforce his militia, Bacon gave an Emancipation Proclamation and letting slaves know and indentured servants know that if you join his militia, you will be free of your contract as an indentured servant and free of your servitude, involuntary servitude, as a slave. Well, that Emancipation Proclamation got him some more soldiers to fight in his fight. Jamestown eventually burnt to the ground by Bacon's militia in Bacon's rebellion. Ultimately, Bacon was defeated. He died of dysentery on the battlefield or in battle or whatever. And his troops eventually dispersed, his militia dispersed, and people went back to life the way it was prior to Bacon's interference in the colony of Virginia. But there was a residual effect of Bacon's rebellion, which was this. The elites, and who were the elites? Land-owning, wealthy, Christian males, they comprised the voting class back then. So the laws that were put into effect were voted into effect by land-owning, Christian males, right? And in another previous podcast, I talk about how in the Dred Scott case, they presented evidence, at least one of the dissenting judges did, that if you met those qualifications, land-owning, Christian, male, you had the right to vote. It didn't mention race. And I've also put in another podcast where you had land-owning, male Christians who were black who could also vote. And those people actually voted to ratify the Constitution of the United States. Well, anyway, it was those people who put forth what we know today as the Virginia Codes, aka the Virginia Black Codes. And I was taught in school that this was basically a racist bunch of laws. The people who enacted those laws were simply racist, and they didn't want, black people and white people to intermingle or whatever. But it was a little bit more complicated than that, because at the time, 1776 was Bacon's rebellion, and the subsequent Virginia Black Codes and laws like it throughout the colonies. When they were initially enacted, there was very few black people in America. There was very few slaves. It was mainly, especially in 1676, there were very few African slaves in America. It was simply due to the fact that the slave trade wasn't as robust yet, and therefore slaves were relatively expensive compared to indentured servants from England, who were plentiful at the time because things weren't going so well in England. There were a lot of poor people, so a lot of poor people in England sold themselves into an indentured servitude contract to get to America, right? Eventually, that flipped where slaves became plentiful. Things got better in England, so there was far less people selling themselves into indentured servitude in America, and so that system kind of fell apart. But I digress again. The Virginia Codes were basically enacted to keep the lower classes separated, not necessarily the classes separated, because you didn't need laws for that. Social laws had that well in place before anybody ever stepped foot in America, right? So if you were upper class, you didn't mingle with the lower classes, right? But in the lower classes, especially in 1676, You had indentured servants, white, black, slaves, white, black, intermingling together. And one negative consequence of that for those who weren't in that class was Bacon's ability to get a bigger militia with that strata of society, that lower class of society. So in order for that to never happen again, where you get the lower classes together to fight against the ruling elites who are represented in the government, basically, you get the Virginia codes, which basically separated the lower classes from each other based on race. And you can see the effects of that throughout American history all the way up to today, right? So I think when it comes to the Virginia codes, instead of just saying, okay, it was a whole bunch of racist people back in 1676, or it's whenever they were enacted, which was subsequent to 1676. It was more complicated than that, more complex. And the main reasons for these codes were to keep those within the lower classes separated. And lo and behold, 400 years later, you can see the effects of that way of thinking. All right, so that's it for today. I'm going to ask you to like, share, and subscribe again because we often forget. Hit the notification button as well. As I always do, I'm going to leave a link in the description to a website called End Slavery Now, and that's where you can get all type of information on organizations who are currently fighting the good fight against slavery today. And I'm talking about sex trafficking and people being forced to utilize their labor against their will. That's still happening today. So if you want to help somebody who's currently under the iron foot of oppression, instead of just sitting around talking about and complaining about stuff that didn't happen to you but happened to somebody else, check out the website and get involved. Until next time, talk to you again. See ya.